Hello, everyone. This is your co-host, Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist, Patty Wilson. Patty, how are you today?
I am doing really well. It's a good day and been a lot of fun. Had a great time putting this podcast together. Can't wait to share it with everyone.
Okay. And I'm noticing just a little bit of a delay through Skype, so hopefully that won't show up in the recording. But if it does, everybody who's listening, you won't notice, but anybody who's watching, you may notice that. So we'll let you know ahead of time. Down below, there will be in the description all the links paranormalist related, and I say this every time, so I don't want to detail it again. I'm getting old and getting tired. I had to go to a picnic today, and I was the grill meister, so I smell like camping at the moment. So, which is that's our phrase for smelling like wood smoke. And I do wish to thank anybody who's new for finding us. We're happy to have you. We are really fast approaching that 100 subscriber mark on YouTube. So please tell your friends and family, and anybody who'd be interested in our content. If you are returning, we thank you very much. We would also like to thank Kate S. for providing us with some coffee on the Buy Me a Coffee. Again, there's no obligation, but we want to thank Kate. Email address, paranormalist@theparanormalistpodcast.com. Send us your ideas, feedback, say hi, say whatever you like. I mean, don't say nasty stuff, please. We're sensitive people. But other than that, I think that's about all of the commercial part that I have to say. Did I miss anything?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Again, this is completely unscripted, off the cuff, so it is what it is. I hate to use the term organic, but that's pretty close. So what is our topic for today?
Well, ghost cars. I'm so fascinated with this subject. I've always been. So I was doing a little popping around, doing some reading, and along the things that I came up with were ghost cars that are just bizarre stories, insane stories. And I wanted to share some. So we're going to start with some of the more benign ones and work our way through to the end. So there's a couple really crazy stories toward the end, including one from Pennsylvania, which is where Stu and I hail from. And so let's start with one of the probably most legendary stories of ghost vehicles that I have ever heard is called the Ladsbrook Grove Ghost Bus, also known as the number 7 London bus. So basically, we know that in the early 1930s there was a bus, double-decker bus, that had an accident, and there was casualties from it, of course. So fast forward to about 1932. There is this pedestrian who's walking down the road. They see this car driving down the road and alongside them, and it's going ahead of them. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a double-decker bus number 7 appears and is shooting at them from the coming right toward them, and the poor driver doesn't know what to do, so he swerves to miss the bus, hits a pillar on the edge of the highway, and dies. So it's just a horrendous story. And this gentleman stays, tries to get help, talks to the police, and tells them this bizarre story. And they go, "That's ridiculous. There's no number 7 bus anymore." He's like, "No, I'm serious. I saw it." So that was the first time that we know for a fact this bus was seen. And it seems to appear mostly late at night in the middle of what's called Cambridge Gardens. And it's not a route that number 7 would have traveled in its lifetime. That's kind of important to know. Like, why it chose this route, I don't know. There have been multiple stories of this bus appearing out of nowhere, and nobody has the faintest clue where it comes from or anything. So first of all, there was this theory that it looked a lot like the double-decker buses of that were in service today. So there was a company that thought maybe that this was a confusion, and so they changed the bus logos and everything so that it wouldn't look the same. And they had thought that this would end the stories of number 7, but it didn't at all. There have been multiple people who've had the exact same experience of coming through, even drivers who survived but were injured, who have talked about this bus coming out of nowhere, the bright lights, both sections, it's a double decker, lit up internally, and there were no passengers and no driver.
Interesting fact to know.
Yeah, I mean, like, they multiple times have said that. So, nobody's ever said they saw a driver driving the bus or anything like that. It was literally always, there was no driver, no passengers, just this bus careening at them at high rates of speed on the wrong side of the highway, and then disappearing as they swerved and ended up wrecking into something. So this went on for many, many years. I really can't explain the ending to this because there is an ending to this. As we speak now, there have not been any sightings in quite a while. And by quite a while, I mean like 1980s, 90s. Okay. What they had done is eventually they made a determination that this intersection, it's called St. Mark's Road in Cambridge Garden, needed widening, and that there was a road repair that needed to be done. After these road repairs were done, the bus has never been seen again. But it's interesting to me that they're not seeing that seeing the bus had nothing to do with that. Like, you could have an accident on a road. I had an accident on a piece of road that's bad, and I didn't think I saw a phantom bus. Pedestrians around me wouldn't have thought they had seen a phantom bus because there was nothing there. So why these two things are linked, I'm not 100% sure, but it's a fascinating story, and I thought it was worth sharing.
Interesting. And you think it would, we'd see more of that, and if I'm stealing some of your thunder, I apologize, but with the proliferation of dash cams today, you think there would be a lot more caught on dash cams?
No, I agree. But and it might be because it went out in the 80s and stuff like that, the 80s, early 90s, that there weren't a lot of dash cams yet at that point.
True.
Not in cars. Police officers were beginning to use them at that point, but I don't think that the civilian population was. So our next story comes out of the Lawrence Daily Journal in Lawrence, Kansas. It was published in 1908, and this is a fascinating story. They picked up a story that had run in a London paper and were sharing it along. So this would have been 1907, and it's May 30th of 1907 when this first event of this kind happened. So it's England's newest war mystery is a will-o'-the-wisp of the British East Coast. Basically what they're saying is that this mysterious gray motor car comes out in the middle of the night, and it races along the East Anglian highways, piercing the darkness with these great big lights and allowing military secrets to be seen. Now, what that means is, if you remember during World War I and World War II, there were blackouts. You didn't want anybody to see the lights. The reason they didn't want that is because of getting bombed and planes being able to triangulate on those spots because there was light to work with. So everybody was told to stay in at night and not to be driving, because that would show them the roadway. They could bomb a roadway. They know they could follow that to a town if they follow the vehicle. Make sense?
It does.
So I wanted people to understand why that's important. This went on for months and months. The people in the area saw it, the farmers in their farmhouses saw it, pedestrians saw it standing along the roads, other motorists saw it, and it would come out of nowhere. Sometimes it was even so clear that they actually got the license plate for it. It was the D4832. That was what their license plate numbers would have been. They looked it up. The police looked it up. There was no such license plate issued at all, ever. There was no history for it. They do know that whatever this was, during this period of time, a Zeppelin followed the course of this car and caused some damage. They have no idea where it came from or where it went to. Even when the police were chasing the car would go up a hill and then just be gone. I thought it was fascinating because like they're talking about, they even laid like roadblocks for this thing where like they would have the road blocked off on both sides. They figured if it and there was it was in a stretch of area where there was no driveways, no little dirt roads, no turnoffs, roundabouts, anything. And the police, because they knew the routes it took, so they set up several roadblocks along those routes throughout the night, and they actually got it pinned between two sets of police, and it just vanished. So I thought that was a kind of interesting story. So to that end, I'm not sure if anybody's ever heard about, but if you've been on the internet and looked at like those state by state haunting sites, you'll come across a place called Blue Mist Road. That's here in Pennsylvania. It's a really bizarre piece of highway where there's all kinds of weird sightings. There's spectral figures seen and what have you. But one of the sightings there happens to be a car that literally, you're driving down this little road and out of nowhere behind you is this car that materializes. And the headlights are piercing, the back of your car. And it's always misty, almost always misty on this road, hence the Blue Mist Road name. So it's always kind of a foggy little piece of highway. And all of a sudden, you see this car coming up behind you really fast. And as you're doing this, you look ahead and somebody steps out in front of you. You turn the car, trying to avoid hitting them. And immediately, when you come to a stop, hopefully without injury to yourself or others, they're gone. The car, the figure, the bouncing light. Some people will describe it not as a person, but more of a bouncing light. And it's just gone. So nobody knows what it is on Blue Mist Road, but this has been going on for quite a long time. And I just thought that, these are sort of some interesting little vignettes and examples, if you will. But now we're going to go on to Ohio, 1950s, on a stretch of highway called Route 40. It's a little bit of it's an old world 2-lane paved highway or road. In December of 1950, there was a truck driver by the name of Roy Fritzwater who was raring down this road near Vidalia, Ohio. He saw something that is just insane. I can't imagine he was roaring down as fast as they indicate, but this is what they claim he saw. Seriously, because you'll understand in a second when you hear the weather conditions. So it was spitting snow, freezing rain. It was very dark. And he dimmed his lights because he saw a car coming toward him. All of this normal enough. When the car got about 200 feet away from him, the light inside of the lights for the car went out. A little light flickered on inside the car, and he saw this thing. And he said it was hard. This is his quote. "It was horrible looking. It scared me. I jammed my throttle and got out of there fast." Soon there were other people who reported it, and eventually they would start reporting it to the police. It was at that point that Fritzwater came forward to validate that he too had seen it. And eventually, when they did a chronology, they realized he was the first person to tell what he saw. Now, here's what makes this story interesting. Fritzwater and all the other people who reported it reported exactly the same thing. Car coming at you, it's lane of the highway, you flip your lights down, all of a sudden its lights all blink off, spark of light, almost like a flame, goes on inside. The car begins to glow green, and you can see inside a driver who is a skeleton.
Alrighty.
So there was actually a couple cases where people said they hit the car because they were startled, and some drivers drive, if you have never noticed it, some people drive where they look. So if you're intensely staring at a skeleton coming at you, you kind of swerve, the wrong direction. And they say the car went through them.
Well, that's a pretty good indication it's a spectral car.
Yeah. Now the police in the local area, they honestly believe that there was somebody driving a car that was playing some sort of a prank. So they decided to sit up and, figure it out. And they said that they believed it was a masked motorist who was wearing a skeleton costume in the 1950s. Thought this was a good prank. But as time went on and more drivers and truckers and what have you, saw it, they said it wasn't a trick. It wasn't a person. You could tell it was a skeleton. It wasn't just skeleton costume. There are stories where the lights went out and they saw what they described as the vehicle jumped into the air and kind of came back down on the other side, hit the ground. Sparks went, which I thought was interesting, off the bottom of the vehicle, and then it just disappeared. Police tried to monitor it. They tried to use the radar on it to try to catch it. They saw it at some points. Even the police saw it, and they couldn't explain it. To this day, nobody knows what caused it to happen. There were multiple people who came forward who spoke about it. There were two brothers, Tom and Rex Weaver, and they said that they had seen it multiple times going down the road because that happened to be the road that they had to travel, like to and from work in town and what have you. And on multiple occasions, they had encountered it. And they gave an interesting account of how they were driving down the road one night. They saw this thing coming at them. The lights went off, and they said not only did the vehicle begin to glow green, but you could see like green mist coming off of it, roiling off of it. And then they saw what they described. And this is interesting to me. This was the weirdest one to me because of the Zoot Suit Man. And we saw within the car a man with a wild looking striped suit on. He began to laugh like a maniac as the car roared past us and then was gone. People who saw the car, including some of the officers, stated that the car maneuvered and accelerated at speeds that cars of the time were not able to handle. They said that the car often disappeared in a puff of green smoke. Nobody ever caught this guy. Nobody got a license plate, nothing. And then after about 2 years, it just stopped. So I just found the elements of it frightening. And I don't know why, but when I read that part about the man laughing, it reminded me of the Zoot Suit Man with strange wide pinstripes, which exactly is what the Zoot Suit had. That kind of creeped me out. The next story is the Phantom Truck of Shades of Death Road. I mean, seriously, do you want to name a road anything more unbecoming than Shades of Death Road? Seriously?
I guess not.
So this is a very small back road. And local people in the area have reported a truck, like a pickup truck, coming from behind. It tailgates them relentlessly. And, it's going for like a couple miles. And then it eventually, just as they think they can't handle their car, because you know how whenever somebody tailgates you, you start to speed up, or, you're like, okay, I'll go a little faster, maybe it'll go. Then you start going slower and you're like, maybe it'll pass me. Like you're trying to get away from it in some way because it's very unnerving. And it's, frankly, it makes you not be able to see if it's at night. You flip up the rear view mirror and you can't see very well, and now you're scared and your heart's in your chest because why is this dude tailgating me so hard, and there's no place around to pull off, and it would be a very disconcerting experience. And according to the people who have had it happen to them, they said that you get this horrible sense of dread. You feel like literally the devil's chasing you, like that up the back of your spine feeling, and then it just is gone. It looks like it's about to hit you and then it's gone. Now, one of the other things I found interesting is that there have been people who have tried to pull over in a wide spot to let it pass, and this is what they report. They said that they pull off as far as they could to let it to swing around them, and it would go around them, but as they're sitting there trying to like calm down for a minute, you would suddenly hear footsteps, eerie whispers inside the car, and a cold spot waft past you.
Footsteps inside the car.
Well, footsteps right outside, but you hear
okay.
them. I apologize. So I would hear footsteps right outside the car door as if something was approaching you. Then eerie whispers in the car, not words they can make out, but definitely whispering, you know, that sound. And then it's cold spot that would come through you or past you inside the car. And I thought that was really interesting. Some people also said that they would see a shadowy figure darting from their car towards the woods, and they would be terrified, so they would just get back up on the road and pray that this, whatever this was, would not appear again. And I can't even imagine how frightening that would be. I mean, imagine you're driving 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, headed home from a party or a family event or whatever, and you take this little road, and out of nowhere you have this experience. And if you are lucky enough to find a white spot to pull off, then, you know, then you have this other part of the experience that those who've managed to pull off reported later. And I just thought that was really interesting. Now, this next one, it's actually took place in December of 2002. There was, this is in England, it's in a place called Burpham, and it's on the A3, which is a little, as a road in that area. And the story goes that somebody was driving down the road, they come around a turn, there's this car in front of them, and the car looks particularly, you know, it's solid. Nobody thought for a minute it wasn't a real car or anything like that. And as they go around this turn, the car navigates it badly and loses control and shoots out and down into the woods. So the person who sees it, of course they're panicked. Oh my gosh, I just saw a car accident. I need to go get help. And back in 2002, there were still a lot of people who did not have cell phones. So, you know, they go to the nearest place and get the phone and call the cops. And this is exactly what happened. The person called the police came out, the police look all around, they don't find anything, nothing. So they say to the guy, I don't know what you saw, but it's nothing. We'll come back in the morning and take another look. Now, this is when the story gets interesting. In the morning, they go back and they take this second look. And they find about 500 yards further down the wreck of a car that belonged to a young man from Portsmouth area. He had been missing for 5 months.
Ooh.
Okay. And they look a little further and they realize he had had this accident in July. This is December. In July, his skeletal remains are partway up the hill. So he must have gotten out of the vehicle after he died, or after he had the accident, climbed partway up, but was too injured to make it up this really steep side of this area, and ended up laying there and died. He had been dead for 5 months when people saw the accident happen and summoned help.
Little too late.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. They actually, they know exactly who the young man was. They know, basically, they think the car left the road, smacked down into the woods, got buried, you know, into the foliage and what have you, so hard that nobody noticed it. He was missing. His family reported him missing. They hunted for him, but everybody missed it. So he took it upon himself to get found.
You've had similar stories to that before too, but
yeah. I thought that was an interesting little story. So this is one that we're going to start into some of the odder stories here. This one took place in Cape Town, South Africa. This particular gentleman had his vehicle. He's going to, you know, on a trip, and he stops over at this little B&B kind of deal. And in the morning, he's, you know, talking to the owners of the B&B, thanking them for a lovely night's stay, you know, settling up all the stuff, when all of a sudden outside they hear a loud crash and they go running out. And there's this guy's Renault. And anybody who's older knows what a Renault looks like. It's one of the God's awfulest, ugliest cars ever built by mankind. And it was not a good car as far as I'm concerned. And, yeah, because they're just not a pretty car at all. There's nothing about them that's like sleek or pretty or anything. And anyhow, they go running out, and the car is jerkily jumping around in the yard. It basically he hits a fence and finally comes to a stop. Everybody thought somebody was trying to steal the car. They go running over to the car. There's nobody driving. And the car turns itself off. And there are no keys in the ignition because the guy had the keys in his hand.
Mhm.
Okay. The guy has to unlock the car door to get into the car. And he's like, what the heck happened? Now, the owner like checks the handbrake is still on, what we call the emergency brake in this country, and everything's still intact. The windows are intact, the doors were locked, everything was perfectly fine, and yet the car did what it did. As they're standing there looking at this car, trying to figure this out, having, I'm sure, the most interesting conversation they've had in a while, the car turns itself on again, shoots itself into reverse, and tries to take itself down the road, where it strikes a tree and finally stops. The official report by the police is that a rusty starting cable shorted it out and made it start driving. Now, I'm not a genius, but I'm pretty sure the transmission has to be engaged for it to go anywhere.
Especially if it's going in one direction, then changes and reverses. Yeah, that's. Mhm.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and it's known as the hopping car, Cape Town. And by the way, the car still exists. It's kind of a sight to see if you get to that area. And I thought it was a fascinating story because I'm, like I said, I'm not a mechanic or anything like that, but I grew up with cars. And I've seen cars like short out or something in the ignition short or something, but that doesn't put them in gear. That doesn't drive them.
True.
So I wonder what was going on. Now, this next story is very odd. It is called the Volga, the Black Volga. Now, the Volga is a beautiful, high-end kind of Cadillac that in Soviet Russia was very sought after by the political class, the well-to-dos, the elites. During the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, there was this story that was spread around, and it was very well believed that there was this black Volga that would appear in the night, and it would pull up in front of people, particularly children, like if you're the teenagers walking or something. A door would open and they would be snatched. Just as though they used the term, it sounded like, as they said, it was as though a vacuum sucked them up. They literally went into the car and they were gone, never to be seen again. Others claimed that when you looked at the car, you could see red eyes, red lights where the eyes should have been height-wise, and that if you looked at it from the rear, you would see horns. Others claimed that the car itself had horns on the trunk, like, strapped down like you would to a hood, but small devil horns strapped on the back of it. Now, nobody knew what this was, and it took men, women, but particularly young kids and young adults. It was terrifying because once you were singled out by the Volga or whatever was in the Volga, you didn't come back. If you managed to get away from it within 24 hours of that, you would drop dead. Just drop dead. So, of course, there were a lot of guesses. It was the government, the KGB. It was the devil. It was nuns. It was a priest. It was a satanic cult. There's a ton of different stories. But the part that you can't argue is that this vehicle became a huge part of the folklore of that area during that time period. And people were terrified, and they still claim that it appears from time to time. So if it was just the KGB, well, that the Soviet Union isn't anymore. And it appeared in multiple places. So like, it wasn't like it just rode one street in one town in one country. It moved all throughout the Soviet Union, and people would see the Volga. And you knew when you saw it because it was terrifying. What it was, what happened to the people, none of the people who went in it, ever came out, to the best of I could tell. And I just thought it was an insane story. How terrifying. So to me, it was a fascinating tale. The next case we're going to visit is actually in North Carolina in the United States in 2011. So this is an eyewitness account. This isn't like a he said, she said. This one's an eyewitness account. He states that the guy was on his way home driving. It's a beautiful sunny afternoon. And right in, he was out in the middle of nowhere. There's, just kind of woods and what have you. And he wasn't thinking scary thoughts. He was just driving down, beautiful sunny day. When he gets to this intersection and he sees an antique car come off of one of the farm roads and come pulling up. The car he described as brown and from, he thinks, the 1930s was the vintage of it anyway. He says he passed the car because it was in front, it turned first and then it was in front of him. So he passes the car and he's thinking about, wow, I don't know who did the work on this car, but she has been completely restored. She's beautiful. And, and honestly, that's what I would have been doing too, is admiring that beautiful vehicle. And he said about a quarter of a mile further down, he looks in his rearview mirror and he sees the car isn't there. And he said, I wouldn't have thought about it. I wouldn't have wondered about it. I wouldn't have been concerned about it, except for this. There were no driveways. We passed no homes. There were no farm lanes. There were no anything in that quarter mile. It was straight highway and woods. Where did the car come? So he said, I went to the place where I could turn around. Right down from that, I turned around and I came back, seeing if maybe it fell into a ditch somewhere, and he missed it as he went around the turn. And he said there was nothing. And he said that after this first encounter, because he lives on that road, he has encountered it on multiple other occasions. And at one time, he said he'd seen it so often it wasn't particularly terrifying anymore. And he began to be more able to observe because he had had so many sightings. But he said, the one thing I did notice is the car never disappeared while I was looking. Something would catch my eye for a second. I'd shift my gaze and I'd come back and the car was gone every time. To this day, he doesn't know what it is, but he has seen it multiple times.
Whatever, knew that he was looking or not, so.
Yeah, you hear stories of stuff like that, quite often, where entities will disappear.
Yeah, I'm thinking of it's like a quantum car, so you change the outcome by looking at it.
In its own weird way, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I've seen things like that before I have to tell you, that one of the reasons I'm so fascinated with this, and I've told this story once before, so please bear with me if anybody's heard it before. But I have a road in the area I lived in for many, many years, like 15 years. And it has a four-way. And I've always been kind of leery of that four-way. I don't know why, but it gives me the creeps. As my kids began to get older and drive, they would say to me that place gives me the creeps. And I noticed that they drove much slower through that four-way, right? And I'm still to this day very, very cautious when I drive it. I still drive it 2 or 3 times a week, even though I moved. And one day I'm there, it's beautiful, bright, sunny afternoon. And I'm slowed down because people come shooting off of I-99, which is a big highway in our area, for those who don't know. And instead of stopping at their stop signs, because they have, or stoplights, they have the stoplight. I have the blinking light to go ahead if there's no traffic. They'll come zipping down and they'll just try to beat you and get onto the road. So it is a scary spot. Many, many, many accidents there. So I always drive slow, and it's a beautiful sunny afternoon. It's about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, middle of summer. And I slow down. I see this old, rusted out Oldsmobile, big, heavy car, shoot down and get in front of me. And I just slow down and let it go. Right? And then it starts to drive so slow. Like it's gauged at 45 to 50 miles an hour through that area, okay? And it's doing like 12. There's no way you can have to slow down for it. There's no spaces there to pass it. And I follow it for maybe 3 miles, and the ass end of the car is sunk as though the springs are shot. and it's rolling on like these ancient tires. The whole back end's rusted out. There's no tail light in the one side. The plates aren't on it, and there's 3 people in it. I can clearly see driver, passenger in the front seat, passenger sitting almost dead center in the middle of the back seat. And the one I can see clearest, of course, being the passenger in the back seat, appears to be male based upon broadness of the shoulders and the fact the hair was very, very short. And I'm driving along, watching this thing, oh my gosh, what's wrong with these people? Let's go, because I literally at that time was still a CNA, and I was headed from one home to another, so I had to stay on a timetable. And
Okay.
I was anxious about that. It goes 4, possibly 4.5 miles up the road. I follow it the whole way because there's no place to get around it safely. We go up a hill. We hit another straight stretch where, it's pretty much I see the car the whole time. Okay. And all of a sudden the car veers to the left across the other lane of traffic and just is gone. It went into the woods. I'm like, and I literally screamed, holy,
Uh-oh.
what was that? And I found a driveway right up the hill, maybe 3 to 5 seconds away, turned around in that driveway and went right back. And I was creeping along at like 5 miles an hour looking for a lane or anything, right? Nothing. Nothing at all in that area. And I see the ruins of an old house down there, but where the driveway had been is all grown up. Like there's trees 15 feet high. It's obvious nobody's traveled that lane in quite a while.
Right.
So I go back down and I do it again and I do it again. I'm like, I'm seriously looking. I missed something. I had to have missed something. I just had to have missed something. I honestly, to this day, don't know what I saw.
I'm sure you have guesses.
Oh, I have guesses. But, at the time, me being me, I would almost have gotten out of the car and walked that lane, except I knew I had to be somewhere. And then when I thought about it later, I thought that was a really stupid impulse, to get out of the car, because whatever it was, it creeped me out so bad. I was like hackles up, scared, the whole 9 yards, the whole time I'm following this car. There was just something unnerving, and I want to use the word unearthly about it. Like I just felt like it wasn't a regular car.
Spidey sense.
Yeah. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons I'm so fascinated with this subject. And so because I've had that weird experience and I can't explain it. I still drive by there every so often, and they'll slow really far down to like, I wonder if, did I catch something at the time? What was it? But it was a physical car and it looked solid. There just that creepy vibe coming off it. So we're going to go do a couple more. We're doing one called a place called Devil's Bend, and it's not too far from Pittsburgh, PA. And it's it's one of those pieces of highway where there's a lot of car accidents attributed to it. Now, what I find interesting about this is that the first known account of this is a group of politicians who were at a nearby school for a caucus. They're driving, back from this. There's like multiple of them in the car, like 4 or 5 people in the car. And they come up against this vehicle that's in front of them. This vehicle is going a little slow, so they're watching for a place to turn. And all of a sudden, at a terrific rate of speed, something comes flying at them, and a siren is going off. They don't see a siren flashing, but they hear a siren. They hear what sounds like, you ever hear a truck driver jam brakes?
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about? And so they hear this jamming sound, like a truck coming at them. The brakes are jamming, and they're gearing it down hard. And they can hear the engine. And suddenly there's headlights coming around the curve at them. And they're white. I don't mean yellow. I don't mean just bright. I mean white. Just bullets of white coming in their direction. And there were people coming through this area walking, and they took off running towards the woods as though to avoid whatever this was. Now, the driver of the car and the others in the car, they're not focused on the pedestrians much at all. They're focused on that vehicle rearing down at them with the lights. Now, they don't see the vehicle clearly. They see the headlights mostly, if that makes sense. And as it gets close, they see a skeletal form at the wheel. He releases his grip from the wheel, reaches over with his right hand, picks up a cigarette, and starts to puff on it. Just as the car seems to slide, they lose it on that turn as they see this thing, and they end up going sideways down the road and smashing into the woods. And it stopped. They pull off the road. They're really badly shaken. There's a couple people that come running up that are like, did you see that too? Did you see that too? And they decide to go down the road to the nearest house, which is a farmhouse. And they talk to this gentleman who lives there. And he's like, yeah, I think you guys must have left an accident. Let's call the cops and go down there, see if we can render aid. So they go down with lights and they look everywhere. There's nobody there. Police look everywhere. There's nobody there. Next day, the police come and look again. Nobody there. They end up, he actually ends up calling, one of the guys calls the morgue and checks to see if there was a body found anywhere else. I mean, because he's that convinced something's happened. It happens occasionally, not every day or anything like that, but there have been a few other people who have reported that same experience through the years. And there's nothing there. In fact, it's happened often enough that there actually have been people trying to find out if there was a fatality there, maybe a big pickup, a rig, or something like that. And to the best of their ability to tell, there hasn't been, but that doesn't explain why multiple people have seen it over the years. And some people without, I mean, like those politicians, it wasn't in their best interest to call in a false call to the police. I don't honestly think they thought they were calling in a false call. I really don't. So I wanted to share one or two more stories. So let's do this. This is 1980s. There's a gentleman who's a football coach. He's driving from one little town to another little town in Montana. It's one of those places where it's like a lot of open territory, no houses, no structures, anything like that. And he sees this man in a 1940s style suit with a large brimmed hat. Again, my zoot suit man appears, or something like him anyway. And this is what happened. He said he was driving along and he's headed home. He sees this, it's evening time, but it's still daylight. And he sees this guy and it's right there in front of him suddenly. And then he's just gone. And here's the interesting part to me. I want to read this part to you, everybody, because this is important. So he says, he's telling the story about this coach that was his friend who saw this thing. He says he was driving along when he saw a hitchhiker on the shoulder of the road. This being back in the day and in a small Montana town, my teacher pulled over to let the guy get in, but without a second thought. The man was described as wearing an old, outdated style of suit. Not quite a zoot suit, but very similar. And it was baggy in the same way. He had a big, stylish hat, and the guy looked like he was from the 40s, sort of pimp-like. My teacher thought it was weird. He was way overdressed, being hot out that evening. But maybe it was all he had. So the guy gets to the teacher and doesn't say a word. The teacher asks him, where does he want to go? And the guy points forward, and the teacher lets him get in the vehicle, and he drives on. Later, the teacher said he tried to talk to the fella, make small talk, it's kind of warm night, ain't it, fella? That kind of stuff. And the guy doesn't say a single word. He just keeps staring out the windshield until suddenly he screams, "Stop the car now." The teacher hits the brakes. Frankly, by now he's kind of feeling a little creepy. And he says, "Here you go, man. It's in the middle of nowhere. And he's like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "Yep, this is where I'm going." And he gets out of the car, and then the teacher pulls back out in this old beat up pickup and starts to drive away, when he looks in the rearview mirror and he sees the guy running at him as if to follow him. And for some reason, he can't, he's terrified, and he just hits the gas to get going. And as he's looking, the hitchhiker drops to all fours and starts crawling after the truck, running as fast as it can run. And the truck fishtails as he's trying to like keep an eye on it, keep an eye on that. And the whole time he's trying to get away from this thing. And he said he lost sight of the guy in the mirror, and then he found a gas station. He pulled in, he used the payphone and called his wife and said, "You know, you're not going to believe what happened to me, but go lock up the house. I'll be right there." She thinks he's joking. He's playing a prank. So she gets mad, and she tells her friends at work the next day about this stupid story her husband concocted to scare her. And it was a stupid story until about a half hour after the water cooler talk, when somebody knocked on her door and said, "Hey, I didn't want to say anything in front of everybody else, but your husband, I don't know that he was pranking you, because I've seen it too."
Nothing like a little validation.
Indeed. I can't even imagine how terrifying that would have been for him. And it's kind of a form of a hitchhiker story, but the most bizarre hitchhiker story I've ever heard. It follows the pattern up until it turns into a whatever, an animal of some sort, and starts chasing and is keeping up with the truck for quite a ways. So I'm going to talk about one more story. This is from Nixa, Missouri, 1932. There was a sheriff there by the name of Frank Jones. And mysteriously one night, he is run off the road and dies in an accident. That's all anybody knows. They don't know who did it, but it looks like he was hit and ran off the road. People in town very shortly thereafter began to see a phantom car going between Nixa and Ozark. I'll get it yet. Ozark. And they keep talking about how this thing tries to run them off the road. It always seems to pick them up just before the spot where Sheriff Jones was killed, and to disappear if you make it beyond that spot to the other side. This was seen for many years. So the speculation is, was Sheriff Jones killed by an accident? Just lost control of the vehicle? There's other theories that he was murdered, although nobody could tell you why. He's a policeman, so I'm sure that he's had enemies. That he committed suicide, even though there was damage to the back of the car that would be not consistent with just running the car forward into an embankment or a tree or, a bridge abutment or whatever. And then this story that just never quite dies. So what killed Frank Jones, the sheriff of Nixa? And is it still out there waiting to take someone else? So with that, that concludes my stories for this evening. I think that there's a lot to think about. And if you know tales about haunted pieces of highway or phantom cars, please reach out and tell us. If you have other ideas for places you want to talk about, let me know. And I have to tell you, I've had multiple private people tell me stories. I have a brother who purchased a car, which I've talked about once before in one of the podcasts, which was, seemed like the car was bent on trying to kill him. It would literally turn to try to hit a brick wall every time he passed a certain area. I know of a friend of mine who tried to buy a car, and he said the whole time he was looking at it, it was a beautiful, like a Camaro kind of car. And this would have been in the early 1980s, like 81, something like that. And he's looking at it with his mom, and his mom's like, "This is a great car. You should buy it, blah, blah, blah. It's wonderful." And he said, all I could do was I could smell rot. Like, if you drive past an area where an animal's rotting up, you could catch that whiff for a little bit. And it was like that. And he said, no, I don't want the car. I don't think I want the car, Mom. And he said to the guy, it stinks. And the guy's like, it can't stink. And he's like, it stinks. It smells like rotted meat. And the guy turned gray.
Hmm.
And he said, that's impossible. And my friend said, I'm telling you, it stinks like rotted meat. And the guy sat down and he said, you guys don't want this car. And he's kind of looking shaken. Apparently, the car had been the site of a suicide of a young man. But they had removed all the carpeting, the upholstery, everything that could smell, and redid the entire interior. And it didn't smell for everybody except for certain people. Like his mom didn't smell it. The guy selling the car didn't smell it. And you could argue the guy selling the car might have smelled it and didn't say anything because he wanted to get rid of the car. But surely his mom would have said something like, oh my gosh, what happened in this car? It's disgusting. So like it happens in our own real lives. So I hope you'll share stories with us in the future. And thank you for listening tonight.
Thanks for telling us. And I think we'll say good night.
Good night, everyone.